Well, it's always a little awkward for me to stand up here and introduce myself. So I'm the first speaker this morning, and I've got some great, interesting stuff for you prepared. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself first of all. I'm Bill Norton with Tea Party Patriots. I'm the Director of Education, Training, and Events for Tea Party Patriots. Been with them for approaching 4 years here in the next couple of months. And what a great organization. One of the sponsors of this event, Tea Party Patriots, is a resource organization helping local groups, just whatever areas we need to help them with. Sometimes we sponsor events like this. We've got all kinds of different tools and materials and things that they can utilize for running their groups. And one of the most important things that we do at Tea Party Patriots is we have a weekly conference call. So if you are the leader of a group, or what we call a local coordinator, because there's no real leaders in the Tea Party, right? We're all the leadership. But if you're a local coordinator, we want you to connect to that conference call so that we can hear from you. That's the number one reason. We've got some great guests that get on that call. We've got some great information on that call, and so it's very useful to you, but we need to hear from you at the same time. Tea Party Patriots, we kind of determine which direction we go based upon where the grassroots tells us. If we've got a major issue or something significant that we're getting ready to do or think about doing, we always put it to a vote on that conference call or when we do a local coordinator conference. And if we don't get a fairly high majority of votes saying, yes, let's do that, then we don't go that direction. And so, like, for example, there's a great issue that's come up the last couple of years that's got people fired up, and that's the Article 5 issue. And so we put out there, how do you want us to handle Article 5? Do you want us to push for one? Do you want us to stay neutral? Do you want us to go against it? Where is the grassroots? Well, the grassroots is quite divided on that. And so the local coordinator said, stay out of it. Just give us information, help connect us with people that have information both for and against, but just you stay out of it. And so that's exactly what we've done, is we've tried to provide information on Article 5, but we've let the grassroots groups just kind of handle it themselves because, as you know, that's an issue that people are either strongly for or strongly against. So just an example of Tea Party Patriots and kind of the way that we handle that. Well, let's see if this clicker's going here. There we go. All right. So my presentation this morning is one that we've titled, Speaking the Language of Liberty. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now I'm sure that those words ring just as true to you as they do to me. And just as true to Thomas Jefferson when he wrote them, but also just as true when he read the words of John Locke, who said 100 years earlier, the state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind that being all equal and independent, another in his life, or no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Now, in that quote, we hear the law of nature and of nature's God. We also hear self-evident truths. And we hear that all men are created equal. And we also hear the fundamental principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, how is it that these two men, Thomas Jefferson and John Locke, who span 100 years apart from each other, sound the same or speaking the same thing? One could interpret history, a very crude interpretation of history, by saying that John Locke simply studied, Thomas Jefferson simply read John Locke, studied him, and copied him. Now, that would be a pretty crude interpretation and would totally miss the mark or the understanding of Thomas Jefferson and his life's work. Thomas Jefferson did just read Locke and did sound a lot like him, but he took those fundamental principles and he made it a part of his life. He lived those principles, and he could speak those principles in his everyday life. And he spoke them so fluently. Wouldn't you agree that the Declaration of Independence is probably the best document when it comes to the language of liberty? Remarkable, remarkable piece of work. So we want to figure out how we can speak the language of liberty and speak it better. Isn't that kind of a challenge? You're talking with a friend or a neighbor, and you're getting frustrated about something because they're not seeing really kind of what you're talking about, and then you get passionate, and then you get labeled as somebody who doesn't care, or you're angry, or whatever, all the other stereotypes that they want to give you. And so sometimes we have a hard time speaking the language of liberty. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is what we need to do in order to figure out how to speak the language of liberty. Toward the end of his life, see if I can get this to go back. It went ahead here on me. There we go. Toward the end of his life, Thomas Jefferson was asked, where did you get the actual words or the actual language for the Declaration of Independence? Some people were saying, oh, you stole it from George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, or you got it from this place or that place. And so here's what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular or previous writing. So he wasn't looking to try to be original. It might sound like somebody else, but I wasn't trying to not make it sound like somebody else. But I also, he said, didn't copy it from any specific writing. He said it was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. Now, Jefferson gives us some great insight on how to speak the language of liberty here. Capture the expression of the mind of your audience. Now, as I'm talking about the audience, I'm talking about anybody from one person up to 7 billion people. So it's a little bit of a range there. But it's whoever you're communicating with is who I'm saying is the audience. So he's saying capture the expression of the mind of the audience, and then give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. The occasion is the actual occasion that you find yourself in at the moment, what's going on in our community and society at the time, what's happening in the news, just all the different things surrounding that conversation is the occasion. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about Tea Party Patriots and some new messaging that we came up with about a year ago. Let me go back a screen here. There we go. Pursue the American dream. Now, a couple of years ago, the local coordinators came to us and said, help us figure out how to talk the talk, speak the language a little bit better. So we did a lot of research and a lot of polling to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And one of the first things we did, we asked the American people, Tea Party Patriots, is it an organization that believes in fiscal responsibility and constitutionally limited government and free markets? Or is it a fringe organization that is that's radical? What do you think the majority result was? Fringe radical organization. That's exactly right. And so we realized we were not doing a very good job at getting the message out of those 3 core values. And so we did a lot of research and things. And we discovered that the American people weren't understanding us very well because they weren't able to personalize those 3 core values. They didn't understand really what we're talking about when we're talking about fiscal responsibility, constitutionally limited government, and free markets. And so one of the first things we did is we started figuring out, okay, those 3 core values, we don't want to change them because core values don't change, but what would be better wording to help people understand what it is that we're trying to say? And so we then went to the new 3 core values. Personal freedom, change the order a little bit. Personal freedom is constitutionally limited government. Economic freedom was free markets, right? And then a debt-free future, that's fiscal responsibility. And we discovered that people really understood that a lot better. They could now personalize it and make it much more their own. And so we also wanted to figure out what kind of phrase helps them envision exactly what it is that we're trying to teach or what it is that we're trying to preserve here in this nation. And that's when we discovered the American dream. is the phrase that people, when they hear it, they understand exactly what we're talking about. And so pursue your American dream has become this great catchphrase that has worked very, very well as we've been using it the last year. We also came up with a couple of descriptions of what the Tea Party is about and what Tea Party Patriots is about. Tea Party Patriots stands for every American and is home to millions who have come together to pursue the American dream and to keep that dream alive for their children and grandchildren. Then we also have, we envision a nation where personal freedom is cherished and where all Americans are treated equally, assuring our of pursue the American dream. Now, those are pretty hard to argue with. They're very straightforward. They don't have any of these buzzwords and phrases that get people all fired up. It just helps people understand exactly where we're coming from. So here's a little bit of the polling data that you'll see that we used in order to kind of see what do people think about when we're talking about the American dream. The first thing when we say the American dream that they think about is freedom, then opportunity, work hard and be rewarded. And that's really, in a nutshell, what we discovered. The American dream to them means the ability to work at a career of their choice, to work hard, be rewarded for that work, keep more of what they earn, and live their life however they want to, as long as it does not infringe upon the rights of others. Isn't that exactly what we're trying to teach? Isn't that exactly what we're trying to establish and to preserve in this nation? And that's what people think about when we say pursue the American dream. Now, if you go down and look at the very bottom two items there, economic security and upward mobility. These are more progressive or socialist type issues. And so when you say the American dream, these are the last things people think about. They think about freedom and independence. So when it comes to speaking the language of liberty, there are three things that I believe that we need to do. The first thing we need to learn how to do is to speak with both your heart and your mind. The next thing is to immerse yourself in the principles of liberty. And then speak the language of liberty, not the language of captivity. Be positive, optimistic, and forward-thinking. So let's go through those three items. Speak with both your heart and with your mind. We need to choose the right words. Just like Jefferson said, we need to use the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. Now, let me show you an example here. You probably won't be able to see exactly what that slide says, but I'll explain it to you here. When we ask the question to people, our economy isn't growing fast enough as it should, and there's not enough jobs, and they're not being created, and our government's spending too much money on the welfare state and not enough to curb deficits and the debt, which limits economic freedom. 57% of the American people agreed with that statement. 65% of liberals agreed with that statement, or disagreed with that statement. But when we make the same statement, but word it just a little bit differently, when we say, when the government cuts spending, it's good for my family and the economy because we'll have more money in our pockets and businesses will have more money to hire new employees. Well, now we see that 63% of the Americans, so we went from 57% to 63%, and we went from 67% of liberals disagreeing to only 51% disagreeing. And what was the difference in the wording? The first one, we used the term welfare state. It's a buzzword that immediately places us in a box. We are uncaring conservatives that just are hard-hearted and we don't care about anybody, right? That's the box that places us in. Well, the moment we actually talk about government cuts to allow more money to be in the pockets of our families and help businesses hire more people, suddenly we get rid of those buzzwords and more people agree with that. It's the exact same issue, same principles, same everything, just different verbiage. So it's important that we pick the words that we want to that work as we're communicating. Now, Benjamin Franklin, he handled this very, very well. Benjamin Franklin, when he talked about the welfare state, he said, "I am for doing good to the poor, but I differ in the opinion of the means. I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading them or driving them out of it. In my youth, I traveled much, and I observed in different countries that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves, and of course became poorer. And on the contrary, the less was done for them, the more they did for themselves and became richer. So Benjamin Franklin here takes both the emotion and the logic, and he puts them both together, right? He connects, and he allows people to connect to it. Jump this slide back here. There we go. So Franklin handles this extremely well. First of all, no question that he wants what's best for the poor. He starts right out with that. And what do we want for the poor? How do we know that we've helped the poor? When the poor becomes richer. So then he personalizes it. In my observation, as I've been traveling around in my youth, here's what I've seen. And they become poorer if we do this. They become richer if we do this. And we're for the poor becoming richer, so let's do this. You see, he personalizes it, and he makes it a lot more interesting to listen to instead of some completely logical thing where we're just giving a bunch of statistics that doesn't work very well, or on the other hand, when we go on some angry tirade that makes us sound like we have no compassion for the poor, which is the furthest thing from the truth, because it's statistically proven that conservatives give far more to charitable causes than the left does. So clearly, we are not without feeling, that's for sure. So again, to give an example of different verbiage, we asked the question, replacing Obamacare with a healthcare system that offers real choices and takes government out of the healthcare business. 58% of the American people said good idea. 61% of liberals said bad idea. Now, if we go and reword that, we ask, would you agree with an organization that stands for healthcare freedom for all Americans so we can choose our own doctor, our healthcare plans without penalty from government if we choose something that they don't want us to? 66% went from 58 to 66% agree or are more likely to agree with that. And then the majority, this question was a little bit different than the last one, the way that we did the final results, but the majority of liberals said that they were more likely to agree with an organization. And in order to agree with what we had just said there, you'd have to replace Obamacare. The difference was we didn't use the term Obamacare. Again, puts you in a box. It immediately labels you as a conservative or as a Republican, and so you're just against the president. And so we want to avoid automatically building these walls and placing us in a box. By failing to use some of those words, we're not sharing our message. In fact, we're sharing our message even better because that wall no longer exists. Now we can actually communicate with folks. See, that's the goal of politicians and the media, is they want to keep us divided. And so they want us to place ourselves in these little boxes. They want us to use these words that immediately divide us, because that's what keeps politicians elected, and it's what keeps people watching the news, right? So the next thing we need to do is immerse ourselves in the principles of liberty. We need to study the principles. One of the best and easiest way to go study the principles is to study the wonderful book, The 5,000-Year Leap. That's a book that you should read and reread every couple of years, and that will help you immerse yourself into the principles of liberty. After we study those principles, we need to live the principles. That's much more difficult, but we need to live them. And then you need to teach them. Get to the point to where as soon as you learn a principle, you can't even sit still until you've imparted that principle into the mind and heart of another. That will help it instill within your heart and mind much better, and you've now spread the message to somebody else. And then the last thing we need to do is try to implement those principles in our own lives, which you should have already been doing as you're living it, but now in our community, our states, and our country. Now, the last thing that I think we need to do, which I'll spend a little bit of time on here, is we need to speak the language of liberty, not the language of captivity. Be positive, optimistic, and forward-thinking. So the language of liberty versus the language of captivity. Downstairs at the Tea Party Patriots booth, we've got these bookmarks. And those bookmarks have on one side some characteristics of the language of liberty, and on the other side, characteristics of the language of captivity. And we find that as people are trying to learn how to speak the language of liberty, that understanding and recognizing the difference between these two is very, very helpful. So some of the characteristics of speaking the language of liberty. It's selfless, positive, optimistic. It gives people vision, happiness. It's motivating, right? It's protecting, maintaining, perpetuating. It's all these positive things. Whereas speaking the language of captivity is contrarian, it's contention, it's destructive, right? It's usually very selfish. It's fearful, instilling fear in people. And so it gives people confusion, makes people feel lonely. So it's all about how you've left your audience to determine whether or not you've spoken the language of liberty or the language of captivity. Now, the reason why I say the way that you've left your audience is because there's no question. As you're speaking to people to help them understand the gravity of the situation that we're in, you will have to speak language of captivity from time to time, which might instill a little bit of fear and a little bit of concern among people, but never leave them that way. Always help them see that we can do this. It's amazing what Americans can do and how we love freedom and what we can accomplish. So always leave them feeling inspired rather than feeling scared or lonely or any of those things. So go down to our booth and get one of those bookmarks, and that'll help you kind of keep track of whether or not you're speaking the language of liberty or the language of captivity. Now, communication is not the words that we use. Communication are the thoughts and the emotions and the actions that you instill in those that you're communicating with. If you've left your audience with different thoughts than you intended, then you failed to communicate. So the goal isn't to communicate so that it sounds good to you. You've got to communicate so that your audience understands what you're saying. So, for example, let's talk about this briefly. If we use the words fight, battle, or war amongst Tea Party activists, they're going to look at it as just a couple of politicians standing up in a debate. No big deal. This is our process, this system, this is how it works. But you use the words fight, battle, or war to the general public. Most people don't like to be recruited into a war. They look at it as a fist fight. That's why most people stay away from politics, because it's a dirty, rotten, filthy business, right? So with the public, if we use words like protect, win, bring peace, those are the things that people are going to gravitate much more toward, even though fighting and war and battling are all the things that we must do in order to protect, win, and bring peace. But they don't want to feel like they're being recruited to a fist fight. When we say, join us in fighting for your freedom, this is what they look at. They see a big giant. You can't fight City Hall, right? It's very, very intimidating for them. So instead, we want them to join us in winning their freedom. Right? Much more positive, optimistic, forward-thinking. You also have to know who you are in relation to your audience. So, for example, if we say, join us in fighting for your freedom, if I'm up here saying this to you, what do you say? Yeah, let's go grab our signs. Let's go make our phone calls to Congress. I'm with you. But what if I am standing up here and I'm no longer Bill Norton from Tea Party Patriots. I'm a 5-star general, and I say, come join me in fighting for your freedom. Suddenly, the very same words, very same audience, you have a different reaction, because fighting for your freedom coming from a general means taking up arms and going overseas and putting yourself in harm's way. It's very different. So now that's language of captivity. The very same words, same audience, different person speaking the words. To speak the language of liberty, you must genuinely want freedom for all, including your political foes. Thomas Jefferson said, and these are just amazing quotes here from him. Jump to it here. If there be any among us who wish to dissolve this union or change its republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left to combat it. So even if somebody is standing up there saying, I want to fundamentally reform this country, do we want to take the freedom away to be able to stand up there and say that? We do not. We still want people to be free to even say they want to totally change our country and our form of our Republican form of government. Because they stand as monuments to that freedom that we hold dear, and that's our freedom of opinion and freedom of choice and freedom of speech. But he also said, we don't want to just leave them unchecked. Reason needs to be left free to combat it. And so we need that freedom. The moment we start wanting to bring captivity among our political foes, that captivity then falls upon our shoulders as well. So my time's running up here, so I'm going to fly through a couple of these slides. Now, Jefferson said, the involvement of the people on the side of government has had a great effect. The good sense of the people will always be found to be the best army. They may be led astray for a moment, but will soon correct themselves. The people are the only censors of their government, and even in their errors will tend to keep these to the true principles of their institution. So even our political foes, even in their errors, for them to still be actively engaged is a positive thing when it comes to checking our government. So we still want our political foes to be able to stand up and to be able to express their opinion and to be able to go against government, especially even when the government perhaps we have our elected officials in there. Because what happens when our elected officials are in office? Can they become wolves as well? Absolutely. In fact, Jefferson goes on. Let me go to this last part of this quote here. He said, cherish, therefore, the spirit of our liberty, and keep alive their attention. If once they become inattentive to the public affairs, you and I, so Jefferson was an elected official at this time, said, you and I and Congress and assemblies, judges and governors, shall all become wolves. He didn't say whether you're right or wrong or anything. He just simply said the people being actively engaged will keep me, Thomas Jefferson, one of the greatest free minds in the history of the world, from becoming a wolf. Isn't that an amazing thing that he said about himself? So one last thing I want to do before I conclude here is show you a final poll. You'll have a hard time seeing that. But this final poll asks the first things we need to do to stop illegal immigration. The number one thing that people said is that we need to restrict the president of giving an executive order in relation to that. Isn't that amazing that the American people said the first thing that's most important to them on illegal immigration was not that we need to secure the border or build a wall or any of those things. The first thing doesn't even have to do with illegal immigration. It has to do with the Constitution and the rule of law. The very first thing is don't damage separation of powers and checks and balances. First thing the American people said. Don't let the president, by far, they said this, 27% of the respondents. 19% said secure the border. That's language of liberty, protecting our freedom, securing our border from criminals, terrorists, all those things. The next item was enforce existing law. People like rule of law. That's language of liberty. And the next thing is send them home. Now, this was the very last, the last two things that were the lowest on the poll, I believe, are language of captivity. Americans don't like to think that we are stopping other people from being free. So when we say just boot them out, send them home, that's the same thing as saying rule of law, but when we say it in that way, boot them out, then it's people picture it as kicking somebody out of an opportunity to become free. And they're not interested in that. They're also not interested in building a fence. They are very interested in securing the border, but they're not interested in this vision that you give them when you say build a wall. They want the border secured, but they don't necessarily want it done in a way that symbolizes captivity, right? So it's just very interesting the way that this poll is. It makes you realize that the words we use are very important. So always relate back, when you're talking about immigration, for example, always relate back to the rule of law and securing the border, because those are the things that people gravitate toward as language of liberty. So, language of liberty basically is staying positive and being optimistic and forward-thinking. When it comes to our fundamental principles, for example, we don't just secure rights, but we pursue happiness. See the difference in making it sound like it's forward-thinking? This is why Obama chooses words like hope and change and forward. This is why progressives like to label themselves progressives, because people like to feel like they're moving forward, even though progressives are bringing us back to the days of kings and feudal law and all that. So language of liberty is really about what's in your heart and mind. It's about positive, optimistic, forward-thinking. It's about wanting freedom for all mankind. And if you keep those things in your mind as you're speaking with people, and you've been keeping yourself immersed in the principles of liberty, then you too will be able to speak the language of liberty with clarity as you're communicating with people. And you won't become that angry Tea Party stereotype that many people love to show us as, right? And I understand we get angry sometimes, we get passionate. So it's important that we have in mind to enlighten people and not just to build walls and to put ourselves in these boxes. Like Jefferson said, enlighten the people, and tyranny and oppression will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day. So with that, I have one last admonition to now go forth and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Thank you very much. So next up, we have like I said, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers today, and next we have Jeff Anderson. Jeff Anderson is the executive director of the 2017 project. He has a PhD in political science from Claremont Graduate University. Anderson was the senior speechwriter at the United States Department of Health and Human Services from 2008 through 2009. His writings have been published in the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, National Affairs, National Review, Claremont Review of Books, Investors Business Daily, the Washington Times, and the New York Post. Please help me welcome Jeff Anderson.